Hello Misfits and welcome. In today's video we are talking about world building. Now I have technically made a world building video before, made one a while ago now, but it was pretty broad. It was just sort of talking about the process of world building in its sort of simplest parts and forms. Today we're getting a little bit more specific. We are talking about how to build your own pantheon, your deities, your gods and goddesses for your own world, your own homebrew ttrpg world. Now I should say before we get into this that I will try to keep this as system agnostic as possible, but it will probably skew a little bit towards D&D 5e, so just keep that in mind. But yeah, let's get into it. So, whether you are building your own homebrew world, or you are taking a pre-written campaign module and just trying to tailor it a little bit, the very first thing you need to do is decide if you are making up these deities, they are original characters of your creation, or you want to use pre-existing ones. I honestly don't remember if these are in the DMG or the player's handbook, but if you look in one or both of those, it's probably in one and not the other, because that's how 5e works. But there's a huge list of all the gods that exist in the Forgotten Realms, and it is very, very extensive. And we're talking pretty much every deity that exists in mythology, all jam-packed in there, plus some original ones to Wizards of the Coast. So it's a pretty huge amalgamation of different things. So you need to decide if you are selecting ones from those lists or coming up with your own. Regardless, the rest of these still apply, but that's what you need to do first. You don't want to do all of the gods, okay? That is a really long list. You need to figure out how many you feel comfortable juggling, because these gods and goddesses are NPCs for you, effectively. These are characters that you're going to have to bring to life and juggle. So if you don't feel comfortable trying to bring 50 different characters to life and making them all distinct from each other, then you're gonna want to take that list and shorten it just a little bit. So figure out exactly how many you feel comfortable juggling, and if you're unsure of how many that might be and how many exactly you think you need, then the rest of these points are going to help you figure that out. So as you're trying to figure out just how many of these deities you need, it's important to keep in mind balance. So we don't want 20 evil gods and 5 good gods, unless that has to do with the type of campaign you're running. Generally, you're gonna want a bit of a balance between good and evil. So it's a good thing to sort of keep in mind the different alignments. Now, I know a lot of people these days don't really use alignment quite in the same way as maybe we did way back in the day, and that's fine. My table doesn't really stay true to alignment that much either, but it is really good when you're trying to create a balance of different characters. Even though we don't necessarily stick to alignment in its sort of as a rigid structure that we have to act within, it is a great way to just sort of very quickly establish how a character kind of is at its sort of base form. And so having that as your sort of template to start out with is great. So you make sure that you tackle or have somebody to represent each of those alignments. There are 9 total. You've got your goods, your neutrals, and your evils. So try to have at least one in each of those to create a sense of balance. But there are more things that we need to cover and consider when we are picking how many deities we want to populate our realm. Alright, the next thing you need to consider when you are trying to figure out just how many deities you need are the different domains. Now, I think the list of domains has kind of grown and evolved over time, but looking at the list, and I did check, it is the player's handbook that all the deities are in, but looking at the player's handbook, I sort of boiled down the domains to the ones that they listed there, which are law, nature, death, life, light, tempest, trickery, war, and knowledge. Okay? So that's 9. Yes, that is 9 different domains, which kind of balances with the 9 different alignments. So though there are probably other domains that exist now, I think a lot of those can be derived from this base list. So keep that in mind. Try to make sure that you have a deity to cover at least each of these domains. And if you want to add any others, maybe check out the different subclasses of cleric and see if you want to add anything from that. But the cool thing about domains is you could have a deity that represents more than one of these. You can have somebody that represents both, nature and death, or both life and death, or tempest and nature. You can have different deities that sort of cover more than one domain, and you can also have multiple deities representing the same domain. That can actually help you create some interesting lore. Maybe you have 2 different deities that represent war or death, and maybe they get along and they sort of cover the different aspects of that domain, or maybe they don't get along and they fight over that. Think about that as you're sort of fleshing out this list and figuring out just how many you need. And that moves us on to our last point, which is to flesh it all out. And this is, I hate to say that, just flesh it out like it's the simplest thing, because it definitely isn't. But that is the next step. So you've figured out if you're going to make these yourself or not, or use ones that are already created. You've figured out, how many you need to cover the different alignments and how many you need to cover the different domains. You've sort of established a bit of a balance and decided how many characters you feel comfortable juggling, and now you need to flesh it out. And by flesh it out, I mean think of how these different deities are connected to each other. Think about, their relationships with each other. Do they hate each other? Do they love each other? Are they related to each other? Are they not? You also need to think about how popular these different deities are in your world. Are there certain areas where different deities are worshipped more than others? Are there certain areas where the worship of these different gods is completely shunned and against the law or taboo? Think about how popular they are, and that might sort of inform how rare or normal it is for people to be clerics and acolytes and paladins. You also need to think about the influence that these deities have had on your world. If you have a super popular deity of knowledge that their followers love to invent and experiment, then that and that deity is super popular, then that might have influenced the world, and maybe you have sort of a more steampunky industrial type of world due to the popularity of that particular deity. Or maybe the war and death deities are very, very popular in a certain region, and that has influenced those areas to be constantly warring and obsessed with, combat and obtaining valor and respect through fighting and battle. So think about all these different things. This is how you're sort of building the lore of your world based around this pantheon that you have created. Well, I hope this was helpful to you. I feel like this was in some ways sort of a weird video. I don't expect this topic to necessarily be popular, but I do think it's something that I would have wanted to find when I was getting started. So that's sort of why I made it. Not because I thought it would do well, but because it's something that interests me, and it's something that somebody like me would be looking for. And this topic is fresh on my brain right now. We've been using pre-existing deities from the player's handbook, but we're now sort of moving towards potentially some original characters as our deities, and sort of moving away from some of the established IP as we decide whether or not to stay in 5e or not. So I've been trying to flesh out my own Pantheon and been thinking a lot about that process, and thought I'd share some of that with you guys. Now, I never once in this video said what the exact number is of gods or goddesses that you need, and I think that's really going to depend from DM to DM. I think normally I try to have like maybe 2 or 3 gods for each alignment, and then try to like, you know, make sure I cover all the domains at least by 1. But it just varies. I think currently my world has a little over 20 deities that we use, and I think the next Pantheon that I'm working on will probably end up sort of similar, but it really just varies. Yeah, let me know how many you use. Let me know if you just like use all of them and that's fine for you and you don't have any issues juggling all of that, or if you've pared down your list. I'd be interested to know what those lists are. Are there certain deities that you just always feel like you have to include, or are there original deities that you've created that you've really fallen in love with? Yeah, just tell me about those things. Of course, if you'd like to support the channel, feel free to like and subscribe. That stuff is actually super helpful. But yeah, leave a comment down below. Talk to me a little bit about all of this stuff. I'd be so interested to hear from you guys. But with all of that said and done, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will see you again next time. And there's the train. Let's pause for that. Sounds like this one. I don't like living near the railroad tracks. I've never had an issue with the sound, like in any other aspect of my day-to-day life. I don't find it annoying. My grandparents lived near the railroad tracks, so it always made me think of there. It was sort of calming. And in college, one of my apartments was very close to the railroad tracks, and you just sort of tune it out. But when it comes to recording things, it's pretty annoying. Is this better or worse than... I lived in Nashville for a time while I was working on my master's, and I lived very close to Vanderbilt's hospital, and that was pretty annoying because it was like ambulance sirens constantly. That I did not like. That's definitely worse than the train. I can do this. It doesn't run all the time. And then Audacity crashes. Did that literally just happen? You're kidding. What? It literally just crashed. Failed to send crash report. What? Okay, well, this has not been the best of mornings. I guess I'll take a brief pause and try to fix this.